One person that can help us answer some of the questions that you posed, Tejas, absolutely, is Andreas Mai. And thank you so much for being here, Andreas. I know you travel quite a bit, and I'm glad this is one of your stops. Andreas is a former director of Cisco's Smart Connected Vehicles. Now he's serving as an angel investor, a board member, and advisor on technology infrastructure, not just for the industry itself, but reaching far beyond that. He's helping insurance companies and city planners, as we mentioned before, answer some of those questions. Manufacturers are a big part of this, obviously, and he's working with them as well as government entities. So I'm going to quickly hand it over to you. You need a clicker. Be careful with that clicker.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much, Anne-Marie and Brett and Tejas, for having me and for this invitation. I'm glad to be here. Michigan has been my home for the last 18 years, even though you may still sense the accent. Yes, I ran the smart connected vehicle business for Cisco for 8 years, and then I retired last September. I was very happy, but then something odd happened around Christmas time or holiday time, as you say here. My wife told me, you need to go back to work. So I founded a company called Ecomo. That's the little logo over there for ecology or economy or mode and mobility. So it's politically correct on every front. But what I also spend a little bit of time on is to figure out what is really the value at stake of all the great things that we've been hearing today in the world and in the various regions of the world. And the number, after kind of consolidating 150 studies out of research, out of industry, that I came up with for the next 10 years, discounted at 7%, is a whooping $5 trillion value at stake through the digitization of transportation. And one thing that I want you to take away from this presentation today is it is not all about the self-driven vehicle. As a matter of fact, as you can see here, it's the smallest contributor of all. It is I call it kind of exponential innovation that is happening. It's innovation stacking up on each other. And the first and foremost important aspect of this is really advanced driving assist systems, the systems that you can buy today, that have a much, much higher penetration in the vehicle population than autonomous vehicles will have over the next 10 years. The second runner-up, as you can see here, is the intelligent transportation system. So that's all the infrastructure that is necessary so that vehicle can actually be smart, that vehicle can actually connect to the infrastructure, find parking, coordinate with the traffic lights, abate congestion. That's the second most important contributor here. The third one is mobility as a service. We will not want to own our cars going forward. We will not need to own our cars going forward. It's the second highest expense item on our budget. And if we have an option just to consume it when we need it, we will take it, this option. The next runner-up is the connected aspect. So that has been around for quite some time. You cannot sell a vehicle today in the modern world without it being connected. When we started this journey 8 years ago at Cisco, people were looking at us with kind of some blank stares, frankly. But today I think it's in everybody's car if you buy a new one. And only the last element is self-driven vehicle, because over the next 10 years, in the end state, I only expect to have a 0.5% penetration in the vehicle population, and that does not make a big dent. But if you then I heard that there are some logistics folks, Dave I think is going to speak about it later on in the audience. This splits interestingly between trucks and cars, so it's different drivers for trucks and cars. For the trucks, it's truly the intelligent transportation systems and the connectivity, the connected fleet element. So how can I improve the operation of a truck operator by way of connectivity? For the automobile, it is advanced driver assist systems and mobility as a service that drive the real value for car fleets. But what is in this? So I aggregated about 450 use cases or 450 impacts from these studies. In the first bucket, the biggest bucket is cost reduction. So we will save a lot of cost, like the mobility as a service cost per mile is lower. That is what happened, for instance, in New York. When Uber came about, insurance will be lower. That's the usage-based insurance industry, and we will have less crashes. On the gross margin increase, that is just the gross margin to eliminate double counting. The gross margin we make on these systems, for instance, level 2 to 5 systems, on people mobility GDP. So you make people mobile, you give people access to healthcare, you give people access to education, you give people access to jobs, and that creates GDP. So it's an economic engine for growth. And the new mobility as a service business. It's a completely new industry that is emerging. And the next big bucket is cost avoidance. The difference between cost reduction and cost avoidance is cost avoidance doesn't necessarily hit the bottom line of an enterprise. We avoid this cost in terms of emissions, in terms of parking space, in terms of congestion, but it does not necessarily hit the profit and loss account of an automaker, for instance. On the other side of the equation, we also have losers. So we will have value that migrates from the taxi industry, for instance, to the new mobility as a service industry. We will have some losses on the insurance side. So those that do not master to figure out which vehicles are kind of less prone to crashes, which drivers are less prone to crashes, will lose. Repairs will lose out. And we have an entire industry around the idea of repairing cars. They will lose out if we have less crashes. Well, and then we have the cost increase. Somebody needs to pay for these systems. So vehicles will become more expensive to some level. And for that reason, we also have cost increases here. We have empty miles. I will speak about this a little bit later. And that is driving a lot of cost. And only the net impact is $5 trillion. Interestingly, if you increase the penetration of these types of vehicles, I categorize these all as different types of vehicles, by just 1% point, you will see that the effect will actually increase by about a third. So for every percent point increase that we can drive to bring autonomous vehicles faster to our roads, to bring advanced driver assist systems faster to our roads, you will see a significant impact. And the biggest driver is mobility as a service, the new emerging industry. The second biggest driver is self-driven vehicles, because as I said, I have very low penetration rates. And we will have winners and losers. So if you look, and we had this comment a little bit before, half of the value that is being created is created for society at large. So the societal impact has significant value. In the other half, you have a couple of winners and losers. And the winners, interestingly, are owners, in particular fleet owners, that will benefit tremendously. The second group of winners is insurance companies, then the auto companies, then the ITS industry, then newcos, so everything like those little startups that create a lot of innovation in this space is the next group. On the losing side, and you see it is actually very little compared to the big advantages or the big winners here, it's just $0.7 trillion. Obviously the drivers will lose, so we will lose some driver jobs. The rental cars, medical and legal professions will lose out a little bit as well. But the most important finding I found from this study was that most of the, let's say, crash-related numbers that you see in press are heavily, heavily overstated. If you really look at the studies, how many crashes can I prevent by deploying certain technologies, you will very quickly realize, and if you then factor in the penetration, that you can reduce globally about 19 million crashes, 12 million injured, and 1 million road deaths. Now, but the net effect of this is actually substantially lower than many of the press releases make you believe. But the interesting thing is, we will be given back 250 billion hours of time. that is equivalent to 400,000 lifetimes or 140 million work years. Yeah. It's a tremendous amount of time. And time is the only thing on this planet nobody can give you back. So the time you spend listening to me, nobody can give you back. So I'm very grateful of you listening. But this is what the time is worth for all of us. And I took the time study, so how is everybody in North America spending his time or her time? And interestingly, you can see here that work consumes a lot of our time, media and shopping. And so what I did, let me start here on the left-hand side, that is more important. We spent an average about 580 hours in our vehicles. About 113 are in traffic inefficiencies. That is congestion, looking for parking, and standing in front of those terrible traffic lights. And if your vehicle becomes connected, assisted, and ultimately autonomous, you suddenly can do different things in your car. And so what I try to do is kind of looking at how we spend our time and then put a value to this time. Yeah, so in average it's less than $5 an hour. This is the time we kind of get back in the car. We spend watching TV, listening to radio, and the advertising industry is making gross margin in the range of $880. In shopping online, the gross margin shopping online is reflected here, which brings us to $3,400 per vehicle per year. That is why Apple, that is why Google want to be in the car. They want this money. And that is why automakers are very hesitant to give them access to their vehicles. The other element that kind of we just had legislation, so this is not very kind of up to date anymore, but just as an equivalent, the amount of fuel saved would be 200 billion liters, and that is trucks, an average truck 2 times around the equator. That's the fuel savings we would get through the aggregate technologies that I showed earlier on. The emissions avoided, and this is the NOx Nevis, the largest tanker ever built on this planet, would be about 1,500 of these ships full of emissions that we would save. And these, again, this is factoring in the very low penetration rates of the technologies that I showed. And this was also an interesting finding. So if you look at, if you increase the penetration again by 1%, how kind of does this impact the fuel consumption? So the interesting thing is, if you look at the self-driven vehicle, it actually consumes a lot of the fuel savings that I showed you on the earlier chart. And the reason is that it is expected, and there's kind of numbers out there that vary widely, I used the average, that we expect 47% empty miles. Empty miles. A car picks me up, takes me to work, picks my wife up, takes her to work, picks my kids up, brings them to school, and in the evening the same way. So if you own your car, you have empty miles. And this kind of brings us to the electrification, meaning that autonomous most likely does only work with electrification, particularly if we look at cities in Asia, or kind of I think 70% of cities in the world are above OECD levels in emissions as we speak, for most of the year. So if we have self-driven vehicles, most likely only electrified ones. Then mobility as a service. So what I try to do is, there's a lot of talk about kind of mobility here in this country in particular, but if you really bring mobility as a service at a substantially lower price to the people, and some people like Larry Burns estimate that you can halve it. If you have an autonomous vehicle, you can even bring it down by 75% per mile. You make people mobile. And while this is not so important for us, because we have the luxury of owning cars for quite some time, it is a game changer for people in the developing world. If you give them access to mobility, if you allow them to go to the doctor, to go to school, to go to work, you change their lives. You make them create a gross domestic product. And the interesting thing is, according to this model with these very conservative numbers, 1.7 billion people get mobility. And that is why this mobility as a service business may be, let's say, not so relevant here, but you need to establish this in the emerging world. Another kind of mystery that I try to resolve is, will we sell less cars? And the interesting result is no. We will just sell them in different parts of the world, and we will not sell them to individuals, but we will sell them to fleet owners who operate mobility as a service businesses. And so if you look at this, just as the kind of, and this is where my model operates, in 1.5 to 2% penetration rates of vehicles that are used for mobility as a service in the entire car population. You see that kind of particularly in Asia, you will significantly, we will see significant increases in the sale of vehicles. In our parts of the world, you will see declines, because vehicles will also be shed here, but the declines are by no way so substantial as some people make you believe this. Jobs. We talked about jobs, and I like to use an analogy. When the first cars came to the streets in the United Kingdom, there was a lot of discussion, and if you look at the newspaper clippings, that, oh my God, what do we do with all the people that breed horses? What do we do with all the people that feed horses? What do we do with all the people that give horseshoes to horses? Yeah, I think the same discussion, just with a different mantle, is happening today in this industry. Yes, we will lose some jobs, and you cannot see this here very well, but they are hardly visible, the driver jobs that we lose, compared to all the jobs that will be created by giving people mobility, by adding other forms of mobility services to the mix. Interestingly, and this is like the global picture that I showed you, you see here, North America is only about $1 trillion, less than $1 trillion actually. The bulk of the benefits will be created in Asia and in Western Europe. But the policies, and this is also, I think, a discussion that needs to be had, are different by region, because we have different problems to solve in different regions, so we need to find different tools, different solutions to solve these problems. The other thing, we talk a lot about innovation. This is, in my view, the axis of how innovation is going to happen. So first we connect the product. Then we need to connect the processes in your enterprise, say remote diagnostics, prognostics. You need to act on that so that you find quality problems fast. The next thing you do is you connect it with your value chain. You may not want to do the software update yourself as an automaker, but you let your supplier do this right away. And the next one is you need to create a value-added ecosystem, because the customer doesn't just want to consume the car as such anymore. She wants to consume other things surrounding it. Yeah, so you need to have a partner ecosystem to connect with. I call this the axis of hyperconnectivity. And you may recall Andreessen, who coined the term software is eating hardware, or software is eating the world. I expanded a little bit on this and said, well, in fact, analytics is going to eat software. Yeah? So it's the data that many people talk about, but it's not the data, it's actually the smarts, the analytics, that is going to eat the hardware, the software. And then when we have all these kind of findings, we automate it. That's the automated vehicle. We have human-defined processes how to react on certain pieces of information. And then we get to the ultimate form of artificial intelligence, where the human is not even needed. The machine learns itself. And I think this is I call it the technology evolution that we see also here. The problem that I see in industrial areas like Detroit is we spend a lot of focus on the hardware. Yeah? But it is no longer the hardware that creates most of the value. And the last axis in this, and you can hardly see this, but it goes right up here on top to business architecture. Because this ability to connect, to create this kind of evolution of technology allows you to create new business architectures, completely new ways of how you sell your products or give access to your products for a certain period of time. The interesting thing is, and again, it doesn't, the picture is a little bit blurry here, I apologize, but we need to close a substantial gap as kind of from an automotive industry perspective to get to autonomous vehicles. And these are areas where the automotive industry is not at home. It is areas like software, like artificial intelligence, like cybersecurity, data management. So in my view, there needs to be kind of on the spectrum of I build this in-house because it's a control point to I partner or I buy this, yeah. There needs to be a strategy of what do you really need to control? What can you rightfully manage in-house as opposed to where do you need a partner to do this? Well, and this is how I spend most of my time with small little startups. So I'm watching about nearly 700 startups right now. And when you kind of categorize them, about 350 are vehicle related, yeah, and you can see the number of startups that I regard as innovative here, starting with services, insurance telematics, car trading, interestingly enough, connected car platforms, advanced driver assist systems, and going down the list. And on the mobility services side, it's platform providers, multimodal providers, parking, car sharing, fleet management, etc., alternative vehicles. These are startups around the globe that do most of the innovation in the space that we are talking about today. So please do not forget those little companies that become, in many cases, the nucleus for the innovation that the big companies need. With this, I close. I just showed you a glimpse of the global value at stake. Interestingly, if you cut the same data from the perspective of the stakeholders that I looked at, so let's say you look at it from the perspective of the insurance industry, it gives you a completely different picture what you should be doing. Or you look at it from the automotive industry, it gives you another lens. And as I alluded to also from a regional perspective, depending on where you are, you need to emphasize or de-emphasize certain technologies to get the biggest bang for the buck. With this, I close and thank you very much for your attention.